I'm going to go quickly, hopefully in 20 minutes or so, in this lecture on Mehmed Ali or Muhammad Ali. And then the other one is about the 19th century in general, where there is some kind of overlap. So let me start with this lecture about Mehmed Ali. And the idea that I wanted to bring across is how everything you read, everything we encounter is an interpretation. So I want you to think about history as such. It's not facts only, it's facts and their interpretation. A narrative, what I call a narrative, a certain way of piecing together the facts. So historical research can be about producing new facts, unearthing new material that no one has seen, going, let's say, to the archives and finding a document that no one before you has read, or doing archaeological digs that, and literally unearthing new material that sheds light on things. Or you don't actually discover new material. It's the same old material, but you read it in a different way, and you offer a different interpretation. And this is what I'm going to do today with Muhammad Ali. You remember last time I offered what I call the standard narrative of Muhammad Ali, the one that sees him as the founder of modern Egypt. And according to this view, he appears as a tragic hero. By tragic hero, I mean that he's like a hero of any tragic play, a classical Greek play where all the options are bad. He tries his best, but somehow the odds are against him, and he ends up losing despite his best efforts. There is something, one of the things about tragedy, which sadly, this is my next article in the show, we're not trained in Egypt to take tragedy seriously. You're not trained in schools to read tragedy. I don't know what classics you read in school. At my time, it was Abqariyat Omar by Al-Aqad, who appears not as a tragic hero. He's a successful one. He ends up succeeding. There's no odds. There's no difficult options. There's no bad options for him. So things are resolved in a nice way. The tragedy, when you read a tragedy or watch a tragedy, despite the fact that ends up not a happy ending, somehow you are edified, somehow you're enlightened, somehow you're even pleased by reading it. So there's a lot of popularity in this classical reading of Muhammad Ali as a tragic hero. The same, I think, about Nasser. Somehow, the honorable, honest, hardworking man, despite all his efforts, he ends up losing. This is a very popular narrative. There's a lot of resonance with it. I happen to disagree with both of these readings of these two figures. I do not think of them as tragic heroes. I think of them as highly successful, victorious heroes who end up, with him in particular, end up accomplishing much more than anyone could have expected. And let me tell you how I piece together, the story and offer what I would call a revisionist account of this figure. The traditional figure sees basically the confrontation between Muhammad Ali and Palmerston as the key reason for his downfall. A young, an ambitious reformer who starts a very well thought out program of national renaissance, of national development that includes, among many other things, industrialization. This is the first time that Egypt, traditionally an agricultural country, is now witnessing a serious effort at industrialization. Factories are built throughout the delta, the countryside, in Upper Egypt, sugar refineries, leather tanneries, glass, footwear, clothing, armaments. Schools are founded to educate people to serve in these institutions. A very ambitious land reform policy, the digging of canals, of dikes, of dams. The most famous is the barrages, the Qanatir al-Khairiyya. A very serious effort at building an army that would defend Egypt and would expand its influence in the Sudan, in the Hijaz. And this army actually succeeds because it is well thought out, until Great Britain interferes and effectively says, no, we will not allow this to happen. These manufacturings are competing with our own factories. We will do everything possible to abort this experiment. And the way they did this is to sign a commercial treaty that we read, the commercial treaty of 1838 with the Ottoman Empire, which is still legally controlling Egypt, whereby the tariffs on imports are reduced, I think, to only 3%. So that the Egyptian industries that needed these customs, these tariffs to protect themselves, lose this protection. And as a result, British commodities flood the market, the local nascent industries are incapable of competing, and they collapse. And that's the end of the experiment. And in the best person who expressed this idea is Afaf Lotfi Said, the author of this book, an American Egyptian historian, very famous, very influential, especially with this book, who ends up, and this is her conclusion, industrialization was doomed in Egypt to fail in Egypt, not through the shortcomings of Egyptians, but because of external European pressures which used Ottoman legal control over Egypt to kill off any potential rivalry to their own industrial ventures. Very powerful statement. We did everything possible. He did everything possible, but the odds were against him. This is the tragedy of Muhammad Ali. This is actually the tragedy of Egypt. Its location, its position, make it targeted. It's a very popular narrative. It has a lot of resonance. In my mind, however, it is defeatist. And it is wrong. And I've spent the past 20 years challenging this particular reading of it. And the way I did this is to shift the analysis a bit, to try and see the story in a slightly different perspective. Sometimes this is what you do to do new research. Just focus the thing slightly differently. Start from a slightly different perspective. And all of a sudden, things look differently. And I decided to think about Egypt from an Ottoman perspective. To think about Egypt, in other words, from the point of view of Istanbul, not from the point of view of Cairo. Why? Because I say, by that time, Egypt had been part of the Ottoman Empire for 300 years. Not 1 or 2 years, not 1 or 2 decades. It's a long time. And that the majority of Egyptians thought of themselves as Ottoman subjects, not as Egyptians. So how would this whole experiment appear if looked at from an Ottoman perspective? So let us tell this story. If we start not from Cairo, if we start from Istanbul. If we start from Istanbul, we start with this guy, the Ottoman Sultan, who is trying his best. This is a very well-educated man, very open. He doesn't know French, but he's very aware of what's happening in Paris, of what's happening in Vienna, of what's happening in St. Petersburg. This is an international statesman who's aware of the dangers befalling his empire, who's trying to reform his empire. And he starts with the military. He starts with the military because he understands the dangers of the military. Think about this. The Ottoman Empire, this is a modern map, but the Ottoman Empire, which was this part of the world, has this huge enemy to its north, Russia. Russia is getting its act together under first Peter the Great, Moscow is centralizing its authority, and something very dramatic happens in 1770, before Sultan Selim III ascended to the throne. Usually the rivalry between Turkey and Russia takes place here, obviously, in the Black Sea. That's, in a sense, the frontier between these two empires. And all of a sudden, in 1770, the Russians defeated the Ottomans here, in their backyard. The Mediterranean had been, in a sense, an Ottoman lake, controlled by Ottoman ships for centuries. And all of a sudden, they were defeated here. Because for the previous 6 months, the Russian fleet had been sailing basically all across, around Europe, and entered the Mediterranean from Gibraltar here, and found the Ottoman fleet and defeated it unawares. It's a very daring, well thought out campaign that took many years to plan. Yes?
So it actually happened in 1850?
No, this is the painting. I always give you the date of the painting underneath. This is an artist's rendition way after the battle took place. The battle took place in 1770, and it was a sign of how advanced the Russians had become, of years and years of investment in military and naval reform, that they could do something like this. Selim knows this, and Selim realizes that for him to catch up, he has to start with reforms. So he's building a new army, he's building a new navy. But lo and behold, while he's doing this, another calamity befalls his empire. This time, not from the Russians, but from the French, which is very awkward, because the French traditionally are the allies, not the enemies of the Ottomans. And he, in Istanbul, had been in correspondence with the French king. They are kind of friends. And the calamity takes place not here, but in Egypt, a very important province of the Ottoman Empire, is invaded by the French. Now, Egypt, as far as the Ottomans are concerned, is an important province. First, because it is wealthy. Now, you may think Egypt is poor now, but at a certain time in history, Egypt was very wealthy. It was the breadbasket of the Ottoman Empire. So much so that if you go to Istanbul even now, and you ask for the Misr's charger, the Egyptian market, you will be led to a market that used to be the grains market for the Ottoman Empire. So wealthy was Egypt that its name, Misr, also in Turkish meant grain, food. So that is how wealthy Egypt was as far as the Ottoman Empire was concerned. It used to feed Istanbul. It also used to protect the pilgrimage caravans going to Mecca and Medina, especially those that originated from North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya. They all come to Cairo, and then they go to Cairo with the protection of the Egyptian governor to Mecca and Medina. So it's a very important province, and all of a sudden it is invaded by the French. The Ottomans still do not have a powerful enough army, a powerful enough navy. So what do? The Ottoman Sultan sends messages to the different provinces. Can you please gather as many men as you could find and dispatch them to Egypt? So the governor of the Balkans, one of the provinces of the Ottoman Empire, here, gathers some men, and dispatches them to Egypt via the Mediterranean. This is how Muhammad Ali ends up in Egypt. He's born in a small village here in Kavala. He's recruited by this governor. He joins the contingent, and he ends up in Egypt. Very significant. Why? Because Egypt at that time, the French, for complex reasons I don't want to go through, had been defeated. Napoleon deserted his men and went back to France. The plague had its toll on the soldiers in Egypt, and they decide to pack and leave only 3 years after landing. So this daring campaign by Napoleon to establish a French empire on the Nile completely collapses. The French leave, there's a power vacuum, the Ottomans are still weak, and this unknown figure, Muhammad Ali, ends up establishing himself as the most powerful man in Egypt. Now, he is not an Ottoman in the sense that he does not come from Istanbul. He's never set foot in the capital. The Sultan, the Grand Vizier, and the Viziers, and the Pashas do not know him. They don't know who he is. And yet, he ends up establishing himself by force as governor of Egypt, and the Ottoman Sultan reluctantly gives in and says, okay, fine, we will give you an order, an official decree appointing you as governor of Egypt. It's a very weird situation. He is not really trusted by Istanbul. They don't know him. And Egypt is a very important province, and he ends up controlling it. He ends up being governor of Egypt. The previous governor, the one that the sultans actually wanted, whom they actually sent to Istanbul, is this guy, whose name is Khusrev. We pronounce him in Arabic as Khisro. This is the guy that Istanbul actually wanted to govern in Egypt. They know him. He's very well connected in Istanbul. The position of the governorship of Egypt is very important. You start being governor of Egypt, you end up being governor of Anatolia, then the Grand Vizier or the Grand Admiral or the Commander-in-Chief of the army. It's an important position in the hierarchy of Ottoman bureaucracy. This is what this guy wanted. And all of a sudden he finds this upstart who literally kicks him out from the governorship and puts him on a ship and sends him to Istanbul by force. So
he had a lot of supporters.
He has a lot of supporters.
The people in Egypt liked him.
The people in Egypt liked him. Yes, he has a lot of supporters. The people in Egypt liked him. He also has troops. He's the only one, the troops he came with.
Aren't they, when they died from the plague?
No.
When they kicked the French out, they died from the plague?
No. The plague happened in Syria when the plague that decimated the French army happened in Syria before these guys arrived in Egypt. Happened in 1800. When the Ottoman contingent, the Albanian contingent with which this guy came appeared, he didn't engage in any, he protected his troops. In fact, many encounters between this guy and the local Mamluks happened with this man standing on the sideline. He's supposed to come to Egypt to help the official Ottoman representative, this guy. The first mention of Muhammad Ali in Jabarti's Chronicle, the famous eyewitness contemporary account by Jabarti, is about this, that Khusrev is engaging the Mamluks in a battle. He's supposed to be aided by Muhammad Ali and his troops, and he finds that Muhammad Ali is standing on the sideline trying to see who ends up winning the battle and sides with him. That's how cunning this man is. So yes, he has supporters. Yes, he's popular.
He let them both fight and he kicked out the winner. And then he killed the rest of them.
No, and then he joined, and he joined the winner, and then eventually kicked him out.
And then he killed the Mamluks.
Yes, yes. So he's a cunning man. He's a serious cunning man who is trying to enhance his chances. Now, the interesting thing, I tell you, those of you who have a writing talent, those of you who think about in eventually writing a play or writing a movie or writing a novel, I tell you, the relationship between these two men is it. This is a relationship that lasted for 40 years. 40 years of enmity and struggle and fighting. It goes on literally for 40 years. I can tell you many interesting episodes about this relationship. But suffice to say that 40 years after this incident, Muhammad Ali is literally dreaming of Khusrev. There's an account of him saying, I had a dream yesterday in which I am fighting this man and all of you are deserting me. For him, the enemy is Khusrev. Evil personified is Khusrev. Why? I'll tell you. But the enmity started then, in 1802, 1803, when Khusrev arrives as the official delegate of the Ottoman Sultan in Egypt, only to find Muhammad Ali already established عيدله مستنيه في الذرة. So that's the beginning of the enmity. He's appointed reluctantly by Selim. You know, he kicks out Khusrev and another guy. And then the Sultan finally says in 1805, okay, you are the official governor of Egypt. That's how Muhammad Ali ends up being the governor of Egypt.
I was just wondering, Muhammad Ali, what position did he have in the army? Was he
He's
a prominent figure?
No, he's second in command of this. This is not the regular army.
No.
This is not the regular Ottoman army. This is kind of an irregular body of troops. The majority of them are Albanian. He himself is not Albanian, but and he's second in command of this troop. The first in command dies in mysterious circumstances. So he ends up becoming...
He stabbed himself 3 times in the back.
Yes. Yeah. حط له خنجر في الشرب. Yes.
I was just thinking if Khusrev was the one that was officially appointed by the Sultan and he was the one that they wanted his wife, and then they send like troops or some backup to help him.
Because they don't have troops. That's the problem. The Ottoman army is weak and it is trying to get its act together. In fact, it is in the process of getting their act together that this guy, I mean, he's trying to establish a new force. They rebel and kill him. That's how serious the situation is. There's an internal mutiny of the old army, not happy with what he is doing, building a new one. So, protective of their interests, they kill the Sultan in 1807. This is how serious the situation is in the Ottoman capital. The Sultan, the head of the state, is assassinated and he's replaced by his cousin, Mahmud. Mahmud is a different character.
He said he was... she was good.
Mahmud, no.
في واحد his nephews he held position before his father, before his older brother.
The Sultan that his
Abraham.
grandson was...
Yeah, there is another one in the middle.
Muhammad Ali.
Yes. No, but we're talking about Istanbul now. We're talking about the... Yeah, no, we're talking... This is Mahmud, who's the cousin of Selim. He becomes the Sultan. He's ambitious. He's much more energetic, and he's trying to gather his army together. And I think he's looking at Egypt precariously. This is an important province. There's this guy ruling over it. We don't know what he's up to, but we have other problems elsewhere, in Serbia, in Montenegro, in Iraq, in Syria, and most importantly, in the Hijaz. Why? Because in the Hijaz, here, this is Najd, this is the Hijaz, this part of Arabia had become part of the Ottoman Empire from the 16th century. However, by the end of the 18th century, by let's say 1770, 1780, a new forces arriving here in what is now Riyadh, which was called Dar'iyya at that time. And they're very interesting, I'm sure you know this very well, those of you who've been to Saudi at least. A very interesting fusion between military power, represented by the Sauds, and intellectual, ideological dogma, represented by the Wahhabis. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab and Al Saud join together, and they expand their control, and by 1806, they capture Mecca and Medina. I don't want to go through the whole story of Arabia, but I just want to tell you how serious this is. This is the two holiest sites in Islam. The Ottoman Sultan prides himself for being the protector of the two holy sites, and all of a sudden, they are taken from him. They besiege the two cities and stop the annual pilgrimage, including the ones that come from Egypt. So why? Interesting question. Because they thought that the pilgrims come with a lot of unorthodox practices. And they want to return Islam to its original puritanical origins. So for them, a lot of the rituals associated with the pilgrimage routes are unorthodox. So they have strict conditions on who to join and who not to join. Politically, this is a serious infringement on the authority of the Ottoman Sultan. The Ottoman Sultan, again, is weak. So what does he do? He does the same thing he did to get the French out of Egypt, which is to call on other, no, not countries, provinces. And this time he calls on Mehmed Ali himself, the governor of Egypt. He tells him, can you dispatch some troops to fight on my behalf in Arabia? And Mehmed Ali immediately seizes the opportunity. He says, yes, with pleasure. He doesn't have an army, but he gathers some Bedouins, some Moroccans, some Sudanese, and his troops, the Albanians, and sends not his older son, but his youngest son, 17. This is a very rare picture, by the way, of Tusun. There are very few pictures preserved for Tusun. This is in the family. I found that one of the princes has this original painting of Tusun.
And a small detailed question. You were saying he gathered Sudanese people. Wasn't Sudan hungry?
Yes, but there's a connection between Egypt and the Sudan. There are always some Sudanese around. There's always some Moroccans around. There's always some Turks around. Again, it's not a regular army. This is his beloved son. Another film, if you want another film, is the relationship between Mehmed Ali and this guy and his older son. Very tense relationship. Very, very uneasy rivalry, fear, mutual, very little love. In my reading, a lot of fiction. But this is the beloved son. He appoints him as the head of the contingent, the head of the army to be sent to Arabia. Yes.
Sorry, I don't get it. How old was he?
17. Yeah. Well, this is how things started. You would have been sent on a mission yourself had you lived back then. Your problem is that you're a woman. But had you been a man, you would have been. I mean, as a woman, you probably would be kept in the palace, but as a man, you would have been sent immediately. In fact, it is on the occasion of appointing Tusun as head of the campaign that the massacre of the Mamluk happened. That's the occasion. He did not invite the Mamluks to have coffee with him. He invited them to witness the official investiture of his son as head of the campaign to Arabia. So after the festivities were done and the ceremonial acts were done, he told them, okay, see you next time. They left the palace and they were massacred. All 420 of them. These are the local warlords. We talked about them before. This is not just some brigands or some, this is like the economic, political elite of the country. You know, the biggest bankers, pashas, builders, patrons of art, founders of households. This is what it is. He kills them, literally. He massacres them and then unleashes his other son, Ibrahim, onto their households, capturing their women, their slaves, their men, and their belongings and their lands. Think about this, please, seriously. This is, think about it. Think about it.
I think
Think-
he was want to be the only one who controlled the
Think about the implications. In my reading, this is the beginning of the modern state in Egypt. We talked about this before. And this is a serious foundation that I think has serious problems because there's no contract with the people. This is a state that is not founded on any constitutional principle. It's literally founded on blood.
Just events he only goes to show no, he wasn't a good person. Look at when Abu Khas, he stood on the sideline watching his comrades or his allies getting killed just beside of whoever is the victor, so he doesn't lose his army. He kills the people who have any sort of control or power over the country just so he can run it all by himself. He takes their lands and their women and their children and whoever as slaves.
And
He ruined them.
let me continue. And all the popular leaders who called for him only a few years earlier to be their leader, he either kills them or confiscates their property or exiles them. You know Omar Makram, the famous mosque? This is one of the popular leaders after whom the mosque is named in Tahrir. There is a nice Orientalist statue of him in Tahrir in front of the mosque. You know which mosque I'm talking about, the mosque in Tahrir. Incidentally, this mosque is built by an Italian architect. It was the same architect who built the Qa'id Ibrahim Mosque in Alexandria. Beautiful mosque, beautiful design. His name is Mario Rossi. So, like the Ministry of Awqaf in Egypt, also built by a Jewish architect. So, wonderful European architects building some of the gems in the city.
I have two questions. One is, was he, like, this is a serious one, was he mentally okay?
No, he is.
And was he well educated?
I think you have every right to ask these questions. They're very good questions. He himself is illiterate, but well educated, if that makes sense. He's street smart, but eventually he educates himself. For example, he became very familiar with the classics of European history. He became very interested in Russian history in particular. He became interested in Machiavelli. When the Prince was translated to Turkish for him to read, to be read to, he finished and he said, so? And they said, well, would you order it to be published? He said, no, I mean, there's nothing in this book that I haven't known already. So that's how smart he is. he became intimately familiar with diplomatic events throughout Europe. He knows everything that happens in Istanbul. He has his spies, he has his men, he has his informants. And he is an amazing tactician and strategist. That's my reading of him. But you are right in saying, did he lose his mind? Why? Because even by the standards of that time, this was a bloody incident. Suffice to say that his beloved wife, Amina, the mother of his... No. He doesn't kill her. He was afraid of her. He was respectful, very respectful of her. She's the only one who could stand up to him. And this happened in 1811. She died in 1821, 10 years later. For these 10 years, she prevented herself from him. She wouldn't allow him to touch her. So that, and he, at that time, he didn't have any other concubines, other wives, or, he was faithful to her. He married after she passed away. But this is how serious this event was. Even by the standards of that time, that his wife became so revolted at him that she could not believe that he could do such a thing.
Now I have a question, Manish.
Yeah.
The people who followed him into the wars and then to everything, he took over Egypt. Did he lose did he lose credibility? Or did they desert him after he did?
No, no, because I'll tell you what. One of the things that he did when he killed the heads of these households, the young lads, the slaves who were in these households became literally his. He now is their owner. Think slavery, think ownership. He's their master. And they became, lo and behold, the new elite. But they are the new elite owing allegiance only to him because there's no one else. The other rivals have been killed. He killed his competitors.
It's one of the best power plays.
It's a master stroke. Yes.
I kind of find it weird, given that he was in the military and he had previous experiences, and value should be something like, loyalty should be something that he values so much, and yet he kills almost all of his supporters.
It's a good question. He is not from a military, from a regular army. I've done some work on his life before coming to Egypt, which I think is what you're pointing at. And my reading of that background is that he actually is a thug. Literally.
He's a mercenary.
He's a thug. In his village, in his original village, he's the local thug, baltagi, in the original word, meaning of the word. And I think this is why he ends up joining this contingent. There's nothing else for him to do. He has no regular job. He hasn't been to school. He doesn't know how to read and write. He marries a wealthy woman. He squanders her wealth. But he's an intelligent guy. And he doesn't know how to harness his energies. And so in a sense, this is not completely out of character. Now, why do I don't like him, obviously. But I respect him. And why do I respect him? Because his character is transformed. Twice, not once. The first is after this incident. He ends up killing everybody, and then in a sense he says, no more blood. And that's an amazing transformation in the character. He ends up being a statesman. And statesmen kill, but not with their own hands. They delegate the dirty business to other people. And you become a diplomat, you become a statesman. This is what he does. So no longer killing, and he does something else. So let us follow the story. He does this event. He sends his son Tusun to fight the Wahhabis. Lo and behold, he succeeds, captures Mecca and Medina from the Wahhabis, and This is one of my biggest discoveries in the archives, an official letter from the ulama of Mecca thanking Muhammad Ali for getting rid of the Wahhabis, using the most powerful words to refer to the Wahhabis. This is a document that the Saudis wouldn't like to read because it refers to them as unorthodox, al-maraqa, al-kharijin, al-khawarij. So very powerful, heterodox. And of course, his prestige is enormously elevated in the empire. He's now the reason why Mahmud could add to his title the title of Ghazi, the conqueror. So it's thanks to him.
How was he affected seriously by Tucson's death when Tucson returned immediately to Ireland?
He died. Yeah, Tucson dies very young. Dies 21, I think, or 22. This is the most moving account of Muhammad Ali's reaction to the news that his son died, because his son died in 24 hours. He captured the plague, died in 24 hours. There's a very, very moving account of by Gabarty of how he literally fainted in the cortege, in the funeral. He couldn't believe what had happened.
I mean, that's got to be crazy, right? You just go off to Saudi and fight.
Sorry?
You just go off to Saudi and fight for 4 years, and you come back home.
And he comes back home victorious, and then he dies in his bed, very young. So it was, and if you want to see an architectural translation of the calamity that befalls him, you go to Islamic Cairo, Shara al-Mu'izz, the beginning of it. There's a beautiful building that I worked on restoring it. It's called the Sabil of Tucson, which he built in honor of Tucson. It's a water fountain. It's a charitable institution that he founded in honor of his son. Then he does something serious. He starts saying, okay, now I need an army to protect myself, because I'm weary of these Ottomans. I know they don't like me. I know they will try and get rid of me. But I know that they still don't have enough means. But this guy, Mahmud, this new sultan, appears to be as energetic as I am. And the question is, who will blink first? Who will strike first? So he says, let me get my act together. I need a modern professional army, like the one I witnessed with the French when they were here, because he saw them. I want a disciplined army like that. Uniformed, well-disciplined, forget the courage, forget the stamina, forget the rhetoric, forget Islam. We need a disciplined army. So where do you get the men from? Sudan. So he sends his third son, Ismail, to the Sudan, again young, but not as powerful as Ibrahim, not as charismatic as Tucson, impetuous, impulsive, rash, unpopular. He ends up being killed in Sudan. And the campaign does not succeed. So 2 years later, in 1821, he takes the most serious, in my mind, decision in his life.
After his wife dies, son.
Yes. Which is to start conscripting Egyptians. This is the first time, not in centuries, but in millennia, that Egyptians are drafted in the Egyptian army. Before then, the Egyptian army is Mamluk, Ottoman, Moroccan, but not of the Fallahin, not of the peasants. Why? Because the peasants are peasants. The peasants till the soil, till the land, they are the producers of wealth. You don't take them and put them into something that by its nature is unproductive. Armies are costly and dangerous. So from ancient times, Egyptians are not conscripted in the army. So this is the beginning of a new system. This is, again, 1879. For those of you wondering about the date, this is the date of the painting or the etching. The conscription happened in 1821, and he hires French officers who had served under Napoleon. Napoleon now is defeated after Waterloo in 1815. They're looking around, trying to find a new employer, and they end up in Egypt, and they end up being officers in his new army. So the men are conscripted, and you remember the slaves that he had captured after the massacre of the Mamluks? They are now being trained by these Frenchmen to be his officers. Think about this. Think about how the beginnings of a new military/bureaucratic elite in Egypt, these
Came from slaves.
were slaves, who became, of course, free men, who owe their allegiance only to him.
10 years before they were their enemies kind of.
But they're young guys. They were young, 12, 13. They were kids. And now they are in their early 20s. And of course, they owe their allegiance to their master, who feeds them, who trains them, who educates them, who marries them off, who bestows so much wealth on them. And when he builds a new army, they are the commanders of the army, of course. What else can you expect but loyalty? So they become Turkish speaking. They are Turkish speaking. They're Turkish speaking officers over an Arabic speaking soldiery. Interesting beginnings of the national army in Egypt. That's how it started.
Question.
But they remain in these soldier positions and they cannot get to, they cannot become officers.
No. They are officers.
But isn't it reserved just for Turks?
Well, they are Turks. They are Turkish. No. I'm speaking about these slaves. The soldiers are soldiers. The Arabic-speaking soldiers are Arabic-speaking soldiers. There's no way for them to be promoted to officers. But these former slaves who were Turkish speakers, because that's what the slaves are. They are recruited from Central Asia. They are mostly Turkish speakers. They are Muslim, white, Circassian, and now they are becoming the commanders of the new army. So he starts training them, and the first contingents, the first battalions are formed. And then something interesting happens, which is that the Ottomans are still suffering from another big problem. This time, not in Egypt, not in Russia, not in Arabia. This time it's in Greece. The Greeks rebel. The Greek subjects, again, who had been subjects of the Ottoman Empire for 250, maybe 300 years, they decide, we want this no more. We are not Ottoman subjects. We are Greek Orthodox Christians, and we want to secede from the Ottoman Empire, and we want to establish ourselves as an independent state. This is the beginning of nationalism in the Ottoman Empire. This is the beginning of the different ethnicities, the Kurds, the Arabs, the Greeks, the Serbs, thinking of themselves as such. They're not thinking that they are Ottomans. They are saying, no, we are Greeks, not Ottomans. So it's the beginning of a new idea spreading like wildfire throughout Greece and having enormous resonance in Europe. One of the most powerful supporters of this new cause is one of the most famous English poets, Lord Byron, who actually joined the rebels and died in Greece fighting the Ottomans in 1824. So this is engulfing the entire Balkans, and the Ottomans yet again are weak. And yet again, they rely on Muhammad Ali. So this time he sends the new troops, not the mishmash of troops that he had sent to Arabia. This time he sends his newly formed battalions. Egyptian peasants, now soldiers, with Turkish-speaking officers commanding them. And they do magic. They defeat the Greeks, and in, I think, March of 1826, Egyptian troops enter Athens and raise the Egyptian flag there. It's a dramatic reversal. I mean, Egyptian Ottoman flag, because Egypt is not a state, it's a province. And these are not victories he's conducting in his name. They are on behalf of the Sultan. So that's how victorious he's become. And then disaster struck. In November of 1827, a battle took place here, a naval battle, in which he lost all his fleet. Do you know the name? Yeah. It's a battle of Navarino, 20th of October, 1827. Again, this is an artist's rendition of the battle.
French and Russian.
Yes. It's a combined European fleet encircling the combined Egyptian Ottoman fleet, sinking it. And in a matter of a couple of hours, all this mighty force was gone.
Wasn't that, or was that because they just kind of happened to by chance meet there?
The story is that, I don't want to go into details, but the story is that it wasn't really planned. The the Europeans did not intend to.
And I thought also Muhammad Ali as well was very against trying to go to war with India.
For a long time, one of the most amazing documents that I found in the archives, I didn't find it. Marceau, Afaf Lutfi Said, the woman I mentioned earlier, is the one who actually wrote about it very beautifully. And she translated it in a beautiful translation with one important mistake. But she said, she's quoting him, she's translating Muhammad Ali as saying the following. He predicted this. 3 weeks earlier, he wrote to his agent in Istanbul, and he said, look, this is not a game anymore. This is serious. Do you think these Europeans have their fleets here for fun? They mean business. And if we have managed to accomplish something in the art of war, let me tell you, we are in the A-B of the alphabet of war, whereas they now can write books in it. I tell you, if a confrontation happens, I will end up losing 30,000 troops. And I cannot face meeting my maker with 30,000 souls in my neck. I now beseech you to tell your bosses in Istanbul, the Sultan and the Vizier, to accept a peaceful resolution and start mediating with the Greeks to find a peaceful, negotiated settlement of this conflict. Because otherwise, we will be defeated. And this is exactly what happened 3 weeks later. This is the cleverness of Muhammad Ali. He reads the map, he understands the odds, he knows he's powerful, but he knows the limit of his power. And he says, we managed to do something, let us translate it diplomatically.
These three countries fought the Egyptian and the Ottoman.
As he predicted.
Just because of Greece, what happened?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Did the Russians interfere in the Ottoman Empire on the pretext of the Christian subject?
Yes. Of the Orthodox.
Orthodox.
The Greek Orthodox. They thought of themselves as the protectors of the... they're using this as a card to interfere in Ottoman affairs.
That's what started the war.
No, that's what increased it. But the war started by the Greeks themselves. So I think this is another turning point in the story. from that time onwards, I think, he thought that this is the end of the cooperation with the Ottomans. Those guys don't know how to run the show. Every time I come to their assistance, I end up losing. I'm not going to play along with them. And he ordered his son to withdraw, and he starts building a new navy immediately. And in 2 years' time, the Egyptian forces are ready to do the most serious undertaking ever, which is the invasion of Syria. He sends his son, now victorious not victorious, but with considerable military experience in Greece, and assisted by one of the French officers who came to Egypt in 1820, the second in command of the army, and together they expand into Syria, and this is the most daring and the most successful and the most ambitious of his campaigns. And the documents of it are preserved in the Egyptian National Archives, 63 boxes of documents, amazing account. You can follow it literally day by day, which is what I did. And the army left and inflicted one defeat after another on the Ottoman army, and ends up in Konya, in the heartland, in the center of the Anatolian plateau. And this is the largest confrontation, 30,000 troops on both sides, 60,000 troops together. And the Egyptians inflict a very heavy defeat on the Ottomans. And Ibrahim manages even to capture the Sadr Azam, the Sadr al-Azam, the Grand Vizier, the Prime Minister of the Ottoman Empire, and sends him as a prisoner to Egypt. So that's how powerful and how successful Ibrahim was. And then the road to Istanbul is wide open. The army has been defeated. And Ibrahim continues to march until he reaches a town called Kütahya, only 1 day's march away from Istanbul. And then suddenly he receives a message from his father ordering him to halt. Ibrahim couldn't believe it. What do you mean, stop? I can see Istanbul. And that's the other genius of Muhammad Ali, because he realized that now his struggle with the Sultan, his struggle with Istanbul, is no longer an internal struggle. It has become a European one. Why? Because the Europeans look at the map and see if if Ibrahim is allowed to march on to Istanbul, he will end up conquering Istanbul, and his men will occupy the city, and the Ottoman Empire effectively will cease to exist. The Ottoman Empire ceases to exist, the entire region will go into war. There will be a European war on the spoils of the empire. London, Paris, St. Petersburg, Vienna will fight with each other, and he tells his son the result will be the Russians end up in Istanbul and the British will end up in Alexandria. And we will be quashed by these Europeans. That is how powerful, how perceptive he is.
Does his son listen to him?
He has to.
You said they were struggling for it.
That's the tension.
So he was trying to avoid a power vacuum.
He understands, he's trying to say, I can defeat the Ottomans, but I cannot defeat the Europeans. So that's what he realizes, and he orders his son, and the result is a stalemate. For 6 years, a stalemate. No, and Ibrahim withdraws to these borders here. Yes?
I was wondering, how much did the European powers kind of see Muhammad Ali as like sort of like an Eastern Napoleon? And do you think that would have affected them at all? Just because, right, Congress of Vienna was 1815. that was supposed to like establish peace in Europe.
That image I think developed later. That image that was developed by French historians in the 1890s, 1900s, looking back with nostalgia to Napoleon and realizing that they've lost the race with the British for empires. So they became interested in this man long after he had died and tried to cast him as an Oriental Bonaparte. That developed later. But you can see from this painting, this is the same painter going to Istanbul, where he painted the Sultan, and came to Egypt, where he painted Mehmed Ali. And they are thinking, Europeans are thinking of them, of these two men, as equals, when in fact he is his vassal. Now, the last episode in the confrontation takes place in 1839, when the Sultan decides to break the stalemate, orders his army to start engaging with the Egyptians. Ibrahim is waiting, military genius, I can tell you a lot about him, and he decides, and he, for the umpteenth time, defeats the Ottomans. This is on the 24th of June. And then a series of amazing events happened. The Battle of Nasibain Nizip, as it's known in Turkish, takes place on the 24th of June. Before news of this disaster reaches Istanbul, Mahmud dies suddenly out of TB. Young, he's only 50 years old. He dies, and then to add insult to injury, the entire Ottoman fleet defects to Alexandria and is given as a present to Mehmed Ali. So in a matter of 2 weeks, the Ottoman Empire loses its sultan, its army, and its navy, and Mehmed Ali now is the single most powerful man in the empire. And he's waiting in Alexandria for Ottoman emissaries to say, we give in, we give up, you win, and you tell us what you want. 1 minute. But this doesn't happen because this guy reappears. This guy has been in the scene all this time, and he's been advancing one step after another until literally he seizes the reins of power in 1839. During the funeral of Mahmud, the Sultan, he literally snatches the seals of the state and appoints himself as Grand Vizier, and then sends a message to Mehmed Ali to abdicate. And Mehmed Ali says, you're not kidding. You cannot be serious. He says, no, I have the Europeans behind me. They are telling me that now all negotiations with you have to go via them. They are willing to stand by the integrity of the Ottoman Empire, and they are telling you to give up all lands. I know we're running out of time, but because it's a dramatic moment, I'll just add give me just 1 more minute. And this is what happened. For 2 years, he's pondering what to do. And finally, that's the other, in my reading, transformation in his character. He realizes enough is enough. And he realizes that this is not a bad deal. They are telling him, if you give up Syria, if you give up Hijaz, we will recognize you as the legitimate ruler of Egypt until you die. And then after you die, your descendants will rule Egypt. I think that, when he came to Egypt 40 years earlier, not knowing Arabic, not being powerful, not having any money, not having any lineage, an illiterate peasant from a remote village in the Balkans, ends up 40 years later as the legitimate ruler of Egypt, with the backing of all European powers, willing to sign on the dotted line, recognizing him as the legitimate ruler, and his sons after him as the legitimate rulers of Egypt. I think he said, this is not a bad deal after all. This is way beyond the farthest of my dreams. I could not have dreamt something like this. And now I can die in peace. And this is what happens. Whereas, and this is the last thing, Khusrev, after making this master stroke, is arrested by the new sultan as a corrupt official and sent into exile, and he dies penniless, having lost all his power and all his wealth. I tell you, it's an amazing drama. The tragic figure in it is Khusrev, not Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali is the victorious ruler par excellence, having managed to accomplish what no one would have dreamt of, and least of them he himself. That is how I offer an alternative narrative of the story of Muhammad Ali and effectively of the story of Egypt under his reign. Obviously, I don't have time to give another lecture. You can see it in the original.
It's in 1930 something.
Yeah, 1937, 1952.
I have an interesting background.
Okay.